It's my pleasure now to invite Dr. Surabhi Pandey onto the dais for her paper presentation. Dr. Surabhi is an assistant professor in the Department of History, Kamala Nehru College of Delhi University. A distinguished academic, she has been a part of several important Delhi University colleges, Jamia Millia, and before that she's been part of the Ambedkar University, from where she did her PhD in School of Liberal Studies. Very importantly, her area of focus is the study of sacred spaces, early modern Indian religious thought, and the religio-political dynamics of Braj. Braj Bhumi has been an important area of her research. It's wonderful to see modern scholars anchored on aspects that have been created from the ancient culture of India. And she has presented various papers in national and international publications. Today, once again, Dr. Surabhi is going to talk on her favorite subject, which is the scribal traditions from Braj. That is her topic. To exactly scribal traditions of Braj, bridging literary cultures and historical narratives. Dr. Surabhi, I'll play your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Radhe Radhe, Namaskar. I have been given this important task, especially after the lunch, to not make you all sleep. So I'll keep my presentation within the time limit that has been given to me and brief so that I don't take over any of my presenters' time as well. So I'll be cognizant of that as well. So I'll be speaking today on scribal traditions of Braj, bridging literary cultures and historical narratives. Now, as part of my associations with Indica also, this is my second time presenting at their platform, and I'm actually honored, and each time it has been a learning opportunity, even through the courses that I have attended. It's been a great learning curve also for me, and especially with Indica, what they have been doing. My topic for today, in fact, touches upon a micro level history, which I am trying to bring up as an example, not necessarily as a direct colonial counter, but rather a small subtle example of scholarship, of references that we find in several such communities which have been traditionally involved in indigenous traditions, and somewhere have not been recognized given their due diligence also in the scholarship. So with this, I would like to begin. Okay. It's okay, I can begin. All right. Whenever the PPT comes, it's okay. It's going to be a brief. There are a few excerpts that I want to cover also with this presentation. Now, as you all know, that India, in fact, our subcontinent has well-marked spaces which are again noted and differentiated on the basis of specific culture. Braj is one such region which is culturally distinguished and has been again not seen much as a political boundary, but more of a cultural space which is again deeply, deeply attached with the religion. So its origin again dates back to ancient term which we see is Braj, and thereafter during the contemporary and up till the contemporary times we see that this evolution of Braj, which again deeply is attached with Krishna lore, all the Krishna's Leela sthals which are again present in this area is also very much intrinsically part of this region. Another important feature, and in fact criteria through which we can sort of gauge and delineate this region, is also the linguistic association, which comes from the Braj dialect. And it is very recently that we see that although this Hindi divide is seen as something which is very new, but all of these dialects have been very, very much present and culturally part of these spaces, and Braj has been so one. So this particular dialect we see being very much prominent in and around Mathura, and it also goes on till region beyond, up till Rajasthan, and even extending till eastern Uttar Pradesh. So the linguistic exposure of this particular Braj Bhasha has also been quite vast. Now, when I speak of Braj Bhasha, or in fact Braj as a kshetra, as a region, and as a space for knowledge production, it is again is of very important value to us. And the traditions which have, which are very closely, deeply attached to devotional landscapes of the region, and have been closely sort of operated within the realms of temples. So this, the first one. So the dissemination and popularization of the Krishna worship, Krishna lore in that manner, can be seen through the angle of various paramparas that have existed. And these paramparas, although existing and began from Braj, but have moved much beyond also. Some of these are the Bhagavati parampara, Bhaktamali parampara, Rajdhari, Kirti Gayan, Riti Kal poetry, which again has been very, used in scholarship. And also you can say some examples like Samaj Gayan are also, in a way, are these traditions, these are paramparas, which are examples of through which the Krishna lore has been, has been transmitted. So in terms of, this parampara, these indigenous traditions, they are, in a way, are lived traditions, and they still exist very much part of these devotional realms. But however, what important becomes, in fact, as my argument also that I'll be covering later also in this paper, is that how this Braj Bhasha has also been used in scholarship mostly from the angles of courtly realms. So this is where what we see is, although Braj Bhasha was a prominent language in the courtly cultures, in the regional cultures, or in the regional courts also. Like, for example, we have during Shah Jahan's reign, we find Sundar, a poet, a Braj poet who wrote Sundar Shringar. He has also wrote a work called Singhasan Battisi. And similarly, Bhushan, who's a very prominent figure from 17th century Braj, he has also written on Shiva Bhavani, which is again on Shivaji, and Chhatrasal Dashak. And in a similar veins, we also find Sudan from Maharaja Surajmal's court, a Jat ruler from Bharatpur, who has also written Sujan Charitra. So this Braj language, and also the poets who used to write in Braj, was, and in fact, an important and cardinal placement among many, many regional cultures which sort of thrived beyond the realms of so-called the parameters of Braj and even beyond. But my idea specifically with this paper comes down to this particular community, which are also known as Likhiya. In Hindi we call them as Likhiya. And in English, an umbrella term which I have used is Scribes, although it doesn't nowhere gives complete justification to the term Likhiya, but I do use it in the terms of this particular paper. And as we see, these Likhiyas were popular, they were found across regions, and like Charans, Munshis, Bhats, these were again different communities which existed, and they went beyond the region of, many other regions, and in different languages they would go beyond and write, and in fact were important markers of dissemination of knowledge. And Particularly if I talk about Likhya community in Braj, we find several such scribal communities which were deeply attached to the temple functionings, temple institutions, and they also played a crucial role in the responsibilities like record keeping, manuscript transcriptions, sometimes tax documentations and diplomatic correspondence, which sometimes involved courts also, and temple institutions, as well as mercantile networks also. And among this Likhya community, what I also find, especially those who were deeply attached with the devotional realms, was that beyond this area of state administration, these scribes were instrumental in preserving religious text. So their functions deeply were, again, copying manuscripts, composing literary works, Pratalipi Lekhan, Kavya Rachna again means newer work, composition of newer works, and Pratalipi Lekhan, which is again handwritten transcriptions of popular works. So this is how, before the print culture came into being, we find that these manuscripts, which were handwritten manuscripts, and these were skilled people, skilled professionals who were engrossed in copying of those manuscripts, and often they would leave at the end, at the colophon, they would leave a marker of there, that who is this Likhya, they would name them, and where have they sort of copied or transcribed that manuscript also, they would always leave that mark on the colophon. And that's how, as documentation process, we also see these. Now, through this paper, again, it becomes important that I'm looking at one such example where beyond this state administration, the survival of these Likhya community was deeply linked to patronage structures, which included royal courts, religious institutions, and local nobility. And it definitely provided them with material and symbolic rewards in the service that they did. And we take up one such case, one example. Can we have the next slide, please? Which is of Gopal Kavi. He's from 19th century, early 19th century, where in the context of Braj, we find his manuscripts, which are again very rare, and it is very recently that one of this work has now been published also. And he is known to be born in Vrindavan, and although his birth here is not clearly somewhere mentioned in manuscripts, but it is known that he survived, he was present in the early 19th century. And he was born into the family of Brahmabhat Brahman, and who were again a scribal community who were involved in writing of prashastis, which are again were done for ruling families. And his work also mentions that he was a resident of this particular locality known as Manipada Mohalla. This Mohalla is still very much present in Vrindavan, and it used to house this particular scribal community. In fact, many such generations, they still live there. Although they are still, they no longer practice this service, but they still live there. And it is an important piece, and I would want to again bring your attention to this particular couplet which I found. And he's known to have been in service as a scribe under Raja Ajit Singh of Patiala, and where he wrote a work called Sabha Varnan, which are again court proceedings or court descriptions, you can say, and another work which is known as Ras Panchadhyay. And it is only in the later half of this of his time of his life, he finally migrated back to Vrindavan. And before migrating, he seems to have taken a permission from the Raja, where he mentions this couplet, Pai het saras amiri so amiran mein, gai teri kirti guninan mukh bhari de, उत्तम जन्म अवतंशी यदुवंशी अंशी परम प्रशंसी जस हई समधरी दे अर्जी हमारी आगे मर्जी तुम्हारी या गोपाल जी को वृंदावन वास जन्म भरी दे तो सो आर कौन है उदार जग मांझ सो अजीत सिंह मेरे तू दरिद्र दूर करी दे. It is again it's like he's asking for the permission, and he's also paying his deep respects, his deep regards, and being grateful to the opportunity that Raja of Patiala has bestowed on him of, being able to work under him for so long. And although he has been in this work of singing glories of the Raja, but he's still, before coming to Vrindavan, he's taking this permission. Now, this excerpt is an important one because it throws the light on how professional mobility was a common affair among these scribes. And they would, of course, frequently travel to far off places and in search of patronage also. And of course, it helped them as a source of earning and sustaining their livelihood. In a similar manner, he has written a couple of more works, and among which one of such work, which is very important, is Vrindavan Dhamuna Ragavali, which is a very new book which has in fact now come up. His work has been compiled and brought to light now. And he has mentioned in one of his couplets of where he's discussing this whole shift in patronage also. In a similar manner, he also discusses in his another work, which is known as Dampati Vakya Vilas. This is also a very interesting genre of work where he's writing in a conversation with his own wife, and there's a whole conversation wherein the wife is asking him questions about the society, about how things are in Vrindavan in 19th century. So she's asking pertinent questions, and in reply, he's answering him back. And in this work, he specially mentions this particular couplet where he mentions that in 1885, Vikram Samvat, 1828 AD, he has composed this work, Dampati Vakya Vilas, and where this particular excerpt comes where he mentions Sahar Pravad Angrejan ke paas, मतलब शहर की जो प्रणाली है, व्यवस्था है, वो अंग्रेजों के हाथ में है अब. So he is again defining that his work, although he has been composing such different compositions also, now stands as a testament which are no longer qualified under English rules presence. So in a way indicating his own vulnerabilities as a scribe. In a similar vein, can we have the next slide? In a similar manner, we also find a very important excerpt which also discusses the extreme conditions of which this particular scribe was going through. He mentions, कुटुम के पालवे को बोले झूठ माच दिन रैनी यह प्यारी बूढ़े वैल लो वेहो करे जिक्री फिक्री वोच व्याकुल रहनो घर को मरम नहीं कहमु कयो करे. So it roughly translates to how to tend to one's household one may resort even to falsehoods. In such times, even an aging bull must toil under burdensome loads. The weight of responsibilities weigh heavily on my mind, unable to confide the household struggles, secrets left undefined. Gopal Kavi thus says, joy resides solely in wealth's embrace. For the employed, destitute, there is no saving grace. So, in a manner, these three excerpts, they're part of the composition of Gopal Kavi, where he again is throwing a light on the changing nature of profession, and which is again very noteworthy here that it reflects the transition under the British rule of why scribes were finding it hard to sustain themselves. However, it also indicates that in times of loss of patronage, there were perhaps certain other ennobled classes which may have emerged, but the erstwhile prestige that they had, that they sort of enjoyed, was no longer there. In fact, he himself says that it is so difficult at an aged, he's an aged man, and still it's so difficult for him to sustain his family. So again, these are encounters, these are challenges, these are subtle references that we find in his work, which gives out the idea of how a small scribe was, what he was undergoing. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, with this I come to my argument, and so to say the last section which I want to cover is how the scribes were sort of coping up during this British transition. Now one can say after 1803, when the throne is finally, the Delhi's throne is finally taken up by Britishers, the early part of it, the early first half of it, in fact, in the scholarship, we don't find as much references of these indigenous communities, what they were doing. Now, it surprises me as a history student myself that why don't we find enough references of these people? What exactly, where do the surveys also land? So what I can figure out is that this standardization of bureaucratic procedure, and especially the emphasis on English language documentation, may have reduced the demand for traditional scribes in proficient in local languages. And especially the case of Gopal Kavi, who faces this unemployment and marginalization, again, it gives out the idea that the profession was slowly perhaps becoming obsolete due to the colonial modernization efforts. So this potential decline in scribal occupation may be contributed to broader economic and social disruptions resulting from British colonialism in India, and which of course illustrates the diverse impact of colonial practices on traditional livelihoods and cultural traditions. And it's again significant that this transition, particularly through print capitalism and linguistic codification, was somewhere furthering displacing the traditional knowledge systems, which in a way were somewhere maybe privileging the Persianite elites discourses and perhaps reducing the vernacular, oral and manuscript based traditions to secondary status. So this again brings me to the very recent historiographical trends which discuss about the print culture, and I'll take few more minutes to just quickly go through them. One of the important works which again has happened within three decades time period, I would say. One of them is by David Wasserbuck and Rosalind and O'Hanlon. They discuss that the early modern era witnessed significant transformations in India, and this advancement from paper-based administrative systems originally developed in the Islamic world. It reshaped the structure of the state. And they are propagating, they are giving the idea that it is establishing a fresh framework for law and governance. In a similar manner, we also find Tyler Williams' work, who discusses about the perspective wherein the social effects of writing had its deep connection with the power and the fundamental distinguish between what is oral and written, and sort of which engages with the world. Another interesting point, and she briefly touches upon the idea of Braj literature also, is of Francesca Orsini. Although I find her argument a little problematic also, because I find that there's a deep-rooted effort to sort of delimit the role of regional cultures and more emphasis towards multiculturalism, even though disrespecting or perhaps disregarding the indigenous traditions which existed. So she in her work has very notably highlighted the role of shared literary conventions, performance traditions, social networks. And she says that before the narratives which again separate Hindi and Urdu into distinct, there was a existence of extensively engaged Braj Bhasha, which was deeply attached to the literary genre prevalent in the Kotli cultures. And her work again, it deeply emphasizes on the multilingual, multicultural milieu, where there was a fluidity. Now, there are again other works like Sheldon Pollock, who, of course, he highlights this relationship between power and culture in modern South Asia, and C.A. Bailey, who also uses this term, an Indian ecumen, which characterizes a distinct information order and indigenous public sphere. He identifies a series of people from official writers and spies to scholar bureaucrats who participated in this information order and processed the material that went into the production of numerous Indo-Persian histories written in the 18th century. This is what Bailey says. Now, my argument with all of these scholarship is that this historiography pertaining especially to the print culture and manuscripts remains centered to the courtly cultures, courtly traditions. And they often overlook the relevance of scribes, copyists, and even local knowledge producer who played a key role, crucial role in preserving and transmitting text. And in a similar manner, it won't be wrong to say that even subaltern history also highlights, although highlighting the micro-histories of resistance, they do not speak of any examples which come from so-called, in this case, as I can say, the Brahmin community being marginalized or oppressed. So we also see that the scholarship, again, is somewhere not discussing these important points, important examples, and which brings me to my conclusion also that in the early modern Braj, scribes were not merely passive transcribers of text, but they were active agents in shaping literary and devotional landscapes. Their work extended beyond copying manuscripts. They played a crucial role in interpreting, modifying, and transmitting text. So, the circulation of text, including bhakti poetry, hagiography, commentaries, were thus not merely a matter of record keeping, but an intentional act of religious and intellectual negotiation, which they were deeply engrossed in. The transition to print, therefore, may have disrupted traditional patterns of textual transmission, privileging new literary forms and linguistic hierarchies that often sidelined Braj Bhasha in favor of English. And however, many scribes, though, tried to adapt and engage in vernacular print culture also, aligning with the local religious institution that continued to sort of rely on handwritten, but it was still seemingly very, very difficult for them to survive. And thus, literacy in Braj was not a completely an inevitable development, but a historical contingent process which shaped by the agency of scribes, shifting patterns of patronage, and the socio-religious transformation of the time. The study of these micro-level scribal practices thus offers us a more nuanced understanding of how literacy functioned as a dynamic and strategic choice rather than a linear trajectory of progress. With this, I rest my point. Thank you.
Dhanyavad, Dr. Surabhi Pandey. Any questions? We have space for 2 questions. Dhanyavad, Surabhi ji.